Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcoming the stranger and exercises in feeding the 5,000. This actually evolved from a joke that every time I went to a Methodist chapel do, I always said it was an exercise in feeding the 5,000, because regardless of how many people were there was always more food than was needed. So that's one part of how it started. Also in 2007, when we had the centenary of the TT races on the island, I was sat in one of the chapels enjoying the food during one of the races and thinking, I really need to do a little booklet called Eat Your Way Around the TT Course. And it would be a wonderful fundraiser for the various chapels. So that is initially where it had come from, just in the back of my mind. In the past 12 months, I've been working on putting together a sort of 200 years of Methodism in my local village. And what fascinated me looking in the local newspapers was how often any event over the past 150 or more years involved food, and always the word refreshment involved. And with a recent sort of Manx Gaelic service at one of the chapels, I'd actually posted on Facebook, there will be cake. And then I put, there's always cake, which did sound like a sort of threat from The Shining, to be honest. So, welcoming the stranger, feeding the 5,000. Hospitality, the sharing of food, the breaking of bread. This is a very strong biblical imperative, and works from the Methodist art collection, I felt sort of summed this up. The supper at Emmaus. It was welcoming a stranger. It was only when they broke bread they realized who they were with. The first miracle is at the wedding feast at Cana. Then you have the feeding of the very public, and that's the interesting thing, the very public miracles of feeding the 4,000, feeding the 5,000. So what do these imperatives, biblical imperatives, look like in action? And this is what fascinated me when I was going through the Manx newspapers, was, as I say, how often it would say about food being involved. Also, we sort of tend to sort of think that sort of new and innovative things are something that we only do now. What I want to know is, what is a midsummer tree event? Also, one of the other ones I found was a fruit banquet. That was in the 1880s, 1890s. I have no idea yet what a fruit banquet involved, or what an American tea involved in the 1920s. But given that in the 1920s, they were having what were called the homecoming. So at Tynwald, the annual open air sort of parliamentary assembly on Tynwald Hill, it was the first time that sort of Manx migrants who'd gone to America were coming back to the island. And in the 1920s, they had the great homecoming. So I suspect that's got a lot to do with why American teas became all the rage at the local sort of chapels. So as I say, every sort of event, whether it was fundraising or whatever, there would be sort of tea and refreshments involved. And often people would be sort of moving from sort of all around the island to come to an event. And in the case of the sort of Sunday school events, it's interesting, here it says, a late train will run from Peel. So they are bringing people in from all over the place. I also like the idea of the fact that they can use the Fairfield, which is where Tynwald Fair for the Tynwald Open Air ceremony is held. There will be the privilege of the St John's Fairfield for any innocent recreation. So I love the fact that everywhere you sort of looked in the papers, any event, whether this is the Sunday school anniversary or the opening of the new chapel in St John's, food was an important part of it. And I personally first realised this when I was working on the social history galleries at the Manx Museum in 1991. And I had the great privilege of having the opportunity to read through the entire Manx Folklife Survey, which was an oral history survey conducted in the 40s and 50s. And virtually every interview talked about people's faith and going to church and chapel. Interestingly, it also talked about their belief in the fairies and all sorts of other folklore. And again, something that fascinates me, the two running together. And so as part of the Crofting Rural Life Gallery, I thought it was important that that should be reflected. So in the church and chapel, although it says here Sunday was strictly observed, and religion was sort of more than an hour in church on a Sunday morning, which I thought that I'd actually put on that panel, church and chapel, not just an hour on a Sunday, which shows how your sort of memory changes things over time, that I very much edited it down. And it was the idea that church and chapel wasn't just about faith, it was your social life, it was your welfare state, it was far more of your life. And in particular, even back in 91, I was interested in how much church and chapel was providing your social life and community life. So why were chapel socials so important and such a fundamental part of chapel life? Well, it was a way of raising money. And I was quite shocked to discover how often there was going to be fundraising events for my own local chapel because there'd been storm damage, or the fact that even after a new chapel had been built, 20 years later, it needs refurbishment and maintenance. So never think that actually maintenance issues are a modern concern. It was always a concern, but people just put on fundraisers as a way of paying for it. So these events raised money, but they were also providing an important part of people's social life. And I suspect for Methodists, an alcohol-free social life. It kept people out of the pubs. It's also something that everybody could contribute to. And I was watching Nadia's food adventures, and she was in Louisiana and talking to people in the Cajun community. And they were saying that when you don't have much materially, food becomes very important. And you share food, you share hospitality, and it's food made with love. Another person in the program talked about soul food. And this made me sort of realize that for Manx rural crofting communities who might not have much materially or in terms of money, actually food was a way of sharing love and hospitality. Also with the sort of chapel socials that had food, if it was just a pure concert that had been put on, only people who could contribute, e.g. singing or playing a musical instrument could contribute. But as soon as you have concert and then the magic words with refreshments, everybody can contribute. And that doesn't matter whether it's with food, with helping decorate the hall, because a lot of these social events did come with decorated halls. It provided opportunities for people to gather from around the island. Something that I'm coming to the conclusion is that in the 19th century, people in an odd sense seem to have been more mobile around the island, whereas I've spoken to people talking about the 50s and 60s, and they often say, oh, we just went to our local chapel. And it's something I want to do more work on, is my impression people were more mobile in the past. It's also ecumenical opportunities. And I know this because our local chapel used to have what were called bachelor teas. And this was in the 1920s, and I think pre and post First World War. And basically, a group of unmarried couples would put on a bachelor tea, and each couple would host a table. And I know they're ecumenical because I was reading up one account for St. John's, And when looking at the names, I was able to exactly date when my friend's grandparents were courting, because it was a Miss Gertie Lowney with a Mr. Bobby Quine. What was also interesting was that both of their brothers were actually, in inverted commas, on the door. One was taking the ticket money. The other actually seemed to be more acting as a bouncer, which intrigued me. But I know that the couple, one was chapel, one was Anglican. So apart from the fact that this was entertainment for young people, it provided in inverted commas, vaguely chaperoned safe space for courting couples. But it was actually something that all young people could get together in the neighbourhood for. But it was actually giving them responsibility for the fact they're organising it themselves. And we often talk about the fact we need to do more with young people, e.g. the late teens and early 20s. And apparently that was happening on the island with very well attended bachelor teas. So it's giving a sort of community cohesion, not just for the chapel congregation or even the local community, but late trains to get you home. And these adverts in the paper and the comment of people was that they're almost places where you could do a run of chapel socials. So it appears to have been a Methodist equivalent of a pub crawl. So coming up to the present day, you have the ubiquitous coffee morning. And what surprised me recently was the comment of, but is this proper mission? Are coffee mornings relevant? Do they bring the kingdom? And I couldn't understand why I was so upset by this comment as to, well, what's wrong with coffee mornings? And interestingly, the more I thought about it, the more I sort of thought, we talk about issues of social contact and social interaction and problems of increasing loneliness as a social problem. And for a lot of people, particularly the elderly, coffee mornings are one place where they can meet people. And for significantly less than going to meet friends at your local Costa, and other franchises are available. I then started sort of looking online and was interested to see how even the ubiquitous coffee morning is kind of changing in shape and form. And sort of a whole variety of different types of coffee mornings being held on the island. And in particular, as a sort of social event, but in the broader community sense. So in my own village, we had what started with warm spaces during the sort of cost of living crisis. The warm spaces weekly event in the winter has now become tea and toast. And what's been interesting for me is it's been intergenerational. Young mums with preschool children come along, but also elderly people from the village. And it's how well everyone gets on. A lot of the older people are grandparents, so they love seeing the sort of the children. And two people who turned up as young mothers with preschool children for the warm spaces and then tea and toast are now members of the church chapel congregation. So this wasn't done as a missional thing, but it's had the effect of getting people over the threshold. So the Isle of Man, Manx tourism, along with many other parts of the sort of British coast, the island was a major sort of tourist resort. And it's interesting how particular chapels would then be involved with tourism. And on this picture of Douglas Promenade, the big tower you can see is Loch Parade Primitive Methodist Church, now Loch Promenade Church. And what you would have found was that the churches which were in the middle of the tourist places would be bigger than they'd need for their own congregation because they're catering for tourists, but they'd also, like Loch Prom, have weekly mystery coach tours for the tourists. They'd also have a summer concert program. So there was always things which would involve the tourists. So a week's holiday on the Isle of Man was no excuse to miss chapel. But what is unique on the island are the TT and Manx Grand Prix races. TT races since 1907, the Manx Grand Prix races since 1923. These were basically intended to lengthen the period of the Manx summer season. So the TT races are end of May, beginning of June, and then the Manx Grand Prix end of August, beginning of September. So, and thousands of TT fans, Manx Grand Prix fans, make their annual pilgrimage to the Isle of Man. And I would say it is an annual pilgrimage to come to the island. So you've come to the Isle of Man. You're here. Where do you watch the races? Because it's just over 37 miles long, the course, going right round the centre part of the island and over the mountain. Well, you can watch at the grandstand, what are now called fan zones, or literally on a hedge bank. It's unlike Formula One or other types of racing where you are quite away from the action. You are literally in places feet from the action on the Isle of Man. Or you could go to Union Mills Methodist Church, which is actually on the circuit. The picture below is from the 1930s, and you can see health and safety is not quite what you would hope, in that people are actually stood in the road as the bikes are firing past. The impression seems to be that then post-Second World War, people are put behind a barrier, and that's when Union Mills Methodist Church Garden becomes a place where you watch from. And speaking to various people, the catering and everything seems to date from the late 40s. So the two seem to be sort of joined together. And what fascinated me was looking on Facebook, looking for people's pictures of Union Mills, but also what they said. And an Irish fan said this year, what a great spot to watch with lovely people. And it truly is an amazing spot to watch because, yes, where those people are sitting, you have a wall and you have a road, and the bikes will be going past. And I should have checked with my friend what speed they're doing. I think they're probably 120 to 150 on the road, literally feet from you. And there is a racing line, and you tend to only panic when somebody is slightly off that racing line. But it's, as I say, this is considered one of the best places to watch on the island. They're not that fast that they are literally sort of, they're a blur as they go by. They're navigating the bends. So it has, I think for a lot of people, everything. It's got a good spectator spot. The chapel is putting on teas and coffees, homemade cake, homemade sandwiches, and most important for female bike fans or the partners of bike fans is it has toilets. So you are not hedging and ditching. It also has a car park. So if you were to sort of talk about sort of 5-star places to watch, and interestingly, the TT amongst, well, not so much Manx Grand Prix, but the TT is becoming more corporate. And so the fan zones are quite expensive places to watch, as is the grandstand. Whereas here it's free. You pay £2 for a chair, and the food is considerably cheaper than you would pay from one of the burger vans. So the essentials, and as I was commenting, as you can see here, very much homemade cake, but also homemade puddings. And one of the comments that was made was, you're not drinking tea and coffee out of a styrene cup. You've got mugs, or if you really want to be posh, you can get it with a cup and saucer. But it's all china. You really sort of feel you can sort of sit down and have a good feed. And one of the things that's fascinated me is talking to people who've been involved over decades with the catering at Union Mills, is the comment that, you'll finish a day and you virtually run out of cake. You come in the next morning and all the tables are refilled with cakes. And it is very much, people have sort of said, an act, a leap of faith. And the comment was that, yes, you want lots of people to help, but you also need lots of people to do the baking and the making of food. And then you need people to turn up. So at every stage, it is a leap of faith to know that that's going to happen. And as you can see here, very happy bikers getting a choice of all manner of food. The way it works is that in practice week, you have just with tea, coffee and biscuits, and then the full selection of food, including pie, homemade pie in race week. This slide shows how many languages are catered for. So it is an international, in a sense, it's an international pilgrimage with all sorts of people coming. And most people are actually coming year on year. One of the people who goes, the comment is, they've been going 60 years. And I suddenly realized that my friend who I watch with at TT has been going almost 50 years, although I don't think he's going to thank me for reminding him of that fact. One of the regular people to attend is actually a Japanese motorsport journalist. And when he did a full article on the TT, there was one whole page of photographs just on the Union Mills ladies. And back in 2005, one of the TT fans designed and produced for them as a fundraiser a TT t-shirt. His particular favourite is the custard, which is why it's the custard capital of the world. But I love the idea that one of the fans had said, served by angels, visited by devils. And the angels. And over the years, these haven't just been people from the chapel itself, but from the local community, from local churches, and also over the years, children. And speaking to people who helped as children in the 1960s, their comment was, I was taught how to wash up properly, I was taught how to butter bread properly, and I felt important. And we often again talk about with intergenerational, how can we make children feel included? Well, that's been happening at Union Mills since they've been doing the catering, and children have been very much included. They still are. It's now the grandchildren, and I wonder if not great grandchildren of people who are helping to make the cakes. So the other angels who are there are the marshals and the paramedics and doctors. And these are the angels which nobody wants to be busy. But what I love is the fact that the medics, paramedics who are at this spot send pictures of the food to the medics at other spots around the course to almost see what you're missing out on. What's interesting here is a comment made by one of the helpers, what a difference a year makes. So we have an image of lockdown and then a year either side, a full TT. A comment made by the sort of one person was, it's a cracking spot at Union Mills Methodist Church, tea, coffee, everything you would want. Further round the course, you have the bikers service on Mad Sunday at Solby, which is, again, something that a lot of bikers go to and is providing hospitality to the racing fraternity. Very much supported by the Christian Motorcycle Cyclist Association and the Biker Bibles, which are given out. You'll find them at Union Mills, you find them at Solby. They, on Mad Sunday, they have a barbecue and they do food, and they also do food throughout the race days and practices. The chapels are also providing somewhere to stay, and at St John's, bikers have been staying, camping indoors is what it's called, from the mid-80s onwards. So the legacy of this is that at Union Mills, they've actually been able to pay for a new porch with a ramp and a disabled toilet. But it's also how many friendships have been made over the time. It's also, the more I thought about it, the pastoral care, because the TT and the Grand Prix, they're times of heightened emotions. And with the great highs, there is also tragically every year deaths, fatalities, injuries. And the chapels are providing, along with many churches, a safe place for people when the worst happens. So the conclusion, it's the importance of hospitality. And as I say, it started as a joke about sort of feeding the 5,000. It's now a work in progress. And as one of the sort of helpers at Union Mills said, fellowship starts at the table with sharing tea and cake. Thank you.